Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Edward Felsenthal. I'm the editor-in-chief of Time, and appreciate everyone being here. We have a great panel. We have 45 minutes. We'll get through as much of this important topic as we can. Going to try to leave a little time at the end for a question or two from all of you. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to ask a question of the audience in general. How many of you own or regularly drive an EV, an electric vehicle? Okay, pretty close to half. How many of you know which metals are in the battery of your electric vehicle and how they were mined? Okay, pretty good, pretty good. Probably a little skewed with this audience, but that's really our topic today, and at the heart of this energy transition. How do we move at speed to get these rare and critical minerals into the supply chain, but also with care, for society and the environment. Our panelists today include President Félix Tshisekedi, the President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Anne-Laure de Chammard, Executive Vice President of Siemens. Sitting next to me, Mike Henry, who's the CEO of BHP Group, Gurdeep Singh, Chair and Managing Director of NTPC in India, and Jeremy Weir, who is Chair and Chief Executive Officer of Trafigura Group in Switzerland. I want to begin with you, Mike, since you're next to me. Give us kind of a state of play in the supply of these minerals that are so necessary for this transition.
So really important question. I think there's been over the past 2 years, there's been this remarkable uptick in understanding, certainly amongst policymakers and key business leaders, of the criticality of metals and minerals to the energy transition. So there's growing awareness around that. I think one of the things that perhaps there's less awareness of is that not only is the world going to need a lot more copper, a lot more nickel, lithium, cobalt, and so on in the coming years, if we're to successfully navigate the energy transition, we're starting from the base of needing to offset a declining production base already, because current resources over time, grade declines in current mines. You have to invest capital just to overcome that, let alone increase supply. And the supply is going to be coming from mines that are harder to find, oftentimes smaller and lower grade. So the amount of mining activity that needs to happen is not just, so if we look at copper, we're going to need 2 times as much copper over the next 30 years as the past 30, 4 times as much nickel, 2 times as much steel, and therefore steel inputs. But the amount of mining activity is going to be even greater than that. And so coming back to your point around needing to ensure that this is done sustainably, if we're not careful in addressing the challenge of the energy transition, we're going to create unintended negative impacts on water, on biodiversity, on local communities, and so on. So as we go about increasing the amount of mining that's happening, it's important that we're doing so with ever higher standards and with companies seeking to create greater value for all those around these operations, and to operate in a way that minimizes the impact on water, biodiversity, cultural heritage, and so on.
Thank you. And you run one of the biggest mining companies in the world, so expertise there. Jeremy, Weir, your company is involved in the trading of these and other minerals and energy sources. How has tell us about the geopolitical environment, the war in Ukraine, these additional stresses on the supply chain, and how is that playing out in your business?
Yeah, I think what is interesting is that if we go even before the pandemic, we had, supply chains were very efficient. It was global, and I think the customer base was typically saying, I want this commodity, what's your price? The pandemic showed that actually, due to port congestions and other restrictions in freight markets, etc., that actually was more likely, when am I going to get the commodity? And now we have much greater fragmentation of supply chains around the world. We're not necessarily here to talk about the oil markets, which are very disrupted as a result of the war in Ukraine, where we're seeing barrels of oil flow travel much greater distances at different locations, so far less efficient. What we're seeing now in the minerals and metal space is extremely fragmented marketplaces. We're seeing geopolitical contexts where you have some countries are now and customers are saying where am I getting these commodities? Who is producing them? What is the timeline? What is the carbon footprint? And then, the commerciality is actually, obviously part of the discussion, but it's less important. So we're seeing very significant changes in the world, and I think this is leading to, if you like, different perception of where I can locate the resources. There is governments saying, and it's not just on the mining side, by the way, it's also on the mineral processing side, because we've seen a lot of the smelting activities being developed over the last 3 decades has been in China. And so we're now starting to see some countries saying, well, I need to differentiate my supply chains. I need to have them from different resources. It dovetails nicely into the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, where people are encouraging to have, if you like, metal processing in different locations. So it's a very fragmented process. It's less efficient, and it's making even the energy transition and supplying the metals for the energy transition far more complex and more difficult.
President Tshisekedi, your country is has the largest supply of cobalt in the world. You have, on the theme of geopolitical tensions, both the U.S. and China eager to be part of that marketplace. How are you balancing that particular geopolitical tension?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me today. I believe that if we consider all these geopolitical tension, there's only one answer. We have to try and remain at the very center of the village and to try and be the partner, to engage on partnerships with all potential partners and have a win-win partnership. The great challenge ahead in the Democratic Republic of Congo currently is unfortunately, in terms of security, we have to reassure somehow the potential investors and tell them that their investments will be safe if, of course, they can invest. So the current trick, everybody knows about it, obviously, and it is the war that is imposed on us by Rwanda, a neighboring country, that is using our minerals in an illegal manner because of the instability it creates in the eastern part of our country. And that is, for us, the greatest challenge. There is great interest, of course, in this. We are currently working on the legislation. And I took the initiative to create a business climate cell that deals with all investors to try and provide support and engage on partnerships and create partnerships. But as I said, the big challenge remains in terms of security.
Mr. President, Gurdeep Singh, your country, India, growing so quickly, enormous energy demands, also very ambitious renewable targets. How are you navigating that dichotomy?
Yeah. Thank you. You rightly said that our energy demand is growing and growing at a very fast pace. If you see the last few months, we have recorded almost 12 to 13% increase in the electricity demand. And to meet that kind of demand, it is difficult to rely only on the renewable in the absence of the viable storage solutions. So it's important that, as Jeremy just said, that the supply chain is a very, very important phenomena. And if you are starting some of the new projects in the renewable side, it's important that you have the visibility that you will be able to complete. But incidentally, this the supply side has gone in the hands of the few countries, and there has been some kind of disruptions which happened in the supply side, and there has been some problems on the delay side. But just to add here, we have a very, very ambitious plan to add 500 gigawatt of the renewable energy by 2030. As of today, we have almost 173 gigawatt of the renewable energy. So going forward, there is immense opportunities for each and everyone to come and invest. And we have a very, very friendly policies, which is like one or two, if I can enumerate, like it is must run. There is a payment security. The transmission system is made free for renewable energy. It can be wheeled from one part of the country towards the other part. So there is a complete focus from the top most leadership, and we are going ahead, and we believe that we will be able to achieve. In the absence of some of the viable storage solutions, one of these energy storage solution which is coming out clearly is the pump hydro. So this is what we are also focusing, so that we can somehow obviate some of the problems of the critical minerals. I'm sure that the technology part will also be looked at by all the technology providers, what can be the different options to this lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, etc. I think this is evolving as the transition is a kind of, it's a journey for the humankind. So I'm sure that there will be many more things which will come on the way. But for the time being, I think it's important that we are as a world, as a global kind of village, we should be really cooperating with each and everyone and try to see that the transition is happening globally, not only pockets of the worldwide. I think this is instead of creating some kind of excellence or the transition, cleaner and greener energy in one part of the world, I think we should start looking at the entire, globe as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne-Laure de Chammard, you have a brand new role at Siemens, designed to support multiple industries in the energy transition. As a first question, what are the roadblocks you're seeing as you dive into this new position and new visibility?
So, as an energy technology provider, we are actually working with the industries to help them in their energy transition through helping them, depending on what country they are in and where they are in their energy transition, switching from coal to gas and then from gas to hydrogen. Mm-hmm. We're helping them as well on all the electrification of the processes. We're helping them in all the power to X and hydrogen in their processes. Also, for all the hard to abate sectors, how to reduce the emissions through carbon capture, how to get robust electricity through grid technologies, etc. So all this, we see the current market as really growing exponentially on that. I mean, there's a huge trend with a lot of industries committing to being net zero by 2030, 40, etc. The real roadblocks for us is not the financing anymore. We can see with the IRA, etc., that there is the push and the financing behind. Mm-hmm. It is the supply chain and the availability of precious metals. If you look, for example, wind turbines, a wind turbine will need 9 times more precious metals than gas turbines. Electric vehicles will need 6 times more than conventional vehicles, etc. And on this, we as a technology company are trying to work on different things. First, recycling as much as possible. Typically on our electrolysis, we are looking how we can recycle all the iridium, platinum, etc. as much as possible in order to save as much as we can on that. And the second part is also investing in technologies which will enable us to diversify the type of mineral that we need, to try to get some minerals that are less rare. And we also believe that we do need, and this was also said maybe by Jeremy, a political push so that there is the right investment in mineral mining, because we believe that some of these metals are not that rare. We just need to invest in the right areas, and it takes time and investment. Yeah.
On that front, there was some news here this morning and in Ursula von der Leyen's remarks about essentially an EU industrial policy somewhat parallel to the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. Is that really opening to the group? How do you assess the significance of that announcement?
Maybe I can.
Yeah.
If I can provide a comment on this, Edward. So I think in the case of the IRA, it's going to have some impact in terms of stimulating investment through the funding available. I think the symbolic significance of it.
This is the IRA or the EU?
No, I'm sorry, the U.S.
This is the US,
IRA.
yep.
So, but I think the same thing could be said of the EU. The symbolic significance of it, in that it provides a level of certainty and confidence to companies that will invest in, developing either kind of the renewable energy supply or the metals and minerals that feed it. But my view as a miner is that, the constraint on getting more metals and minerals out of the ground more quickly, more efficiently at lower cost isn't actually kind of funding from government. And the biggest, the most impactful thing that governments can do is actually to provide policy certainty and to streamline the red tape that's out there. To get a new mine up, we've gone from it taking about 10 years, if I go back 20 or 30 years, to now taking 15 to 20 years. And it's not quite the same as mining, but Germany, with the recent example of being able to get an LNG facility up in 8 months versus it normally taking 8 to 10 years, shows that when the right parties turn their minds to it, we can actually cut through this and get it a lot more done a lot more quickly. That, coupled with underlying policy certainty, including fiscal certainty, you'd see capital flow into the sector. So I don't think there's the capital is there, there's a willingness to invest, but the conditions have to be improved to enable that investment to happen more quickly.
What's the bigger problem, government policy or speed of technological development?
Well, I think in the first instance, it is policy. And everything that drives policy, part of which is public perception. I think that's in the near term. Over the medium to long term, the mining industry has to get better at innovating and taking a bit more risk on deploying innovative technologies. That's the sort of breakthrough that will allow us to unlock more of the existing resources on a smaller footprint more efficiently and more quickly.
Gurdeep Singh, you were nodding.
Yeah, I think I agree what Mike is saying. And the policies is always very important. If I just give the example of India, we have recently come out with the green hydrogen policy, wherein there is a lot of help will be extended by the government of India for the production of the hydrogen infrastructure itself. So there is a kind of more than a $2 billion of production link incentive. And prior to that, if you just, as I mentioned earlier, there has been a clear policy on the renewable side, and that's the reason we had been able to reach to this kind of the 173 gigawatt. So policy always comes, I think, at the forefront, and I think the political commitment and the strong leadership, and it should be a kind of continuing this policy rather than for the short term, then something comes and then it's getting changed, because the investment will only be coming if there is a certainty of the policy over a long period of time. So those are the very, very critical issues. And I believe that the green hydrogen is also going to play a very important role, which is going to be green ammonia, which is kind of, we aspire to even export the green ammonia at some stage. But I think the real issue will start coming in again, the critical minerals, which is the availability, and how soon at how affordable prices we can get on that.
Mr. President, over the last 20 years, Africa has received only 2% of global renewable energy investments, with a handful of countries receiving the bulk of it. What needs to be done to support development of clean energy resources in Africa and the DRC at speed and responsibly?
Très bien.
Well, first of all, I think that we need to improve our institutional framework, proper governance, and reassure as much as we can our partners. Then our policy has already defined the exploration and actual operations in this field. So this is all very important for us because it allows our partners to be properly informed about all the steps that are taken to reach production eventually. Of course, there is strong environmental demand, as has been explained here. We must comply to the rules so that the environmental impact is not detrimental when production actually starts. In our countries, because of poverty, unfortunately, there are still some living styles that are such that there are children and pregnant women still involved in these activities and business. We are working very hard to make sure that these populations are safe from these business. And there is also a important, strong demand with our partnerships. We want our partners to consider the social impacts of all these activities. And by social impacts, I mean that there is a need, an obligation to build up schools and hospitals and many things that will eventually improve the daily lives of our communities. So we do believe that implementing these kinds of policies will be able to reassure our partners, and in exchange of this, with their cooperation and activities, we will create wealth eventually, and will be able to improve the daily lives and living conditions of our populations.
Just as a follow-up, also the human rights conditions at some of the mining centers have, of course, been a concern. Do you see action in that area? How are you thinking about it, both internal policy, but also what you expect of your partners?
What we expect is support, because, as I said, we have real issues, poverty issues. And whole families have to ask the women and the children to work. And we expect from our partnerships, from our partners, from the support, that they provide solutions so that we can create the kind of activity that will help bring those people out of poverty, out of having to work because they can't manage otherwise. And human rights organizations are working in tight collaborations with our government to provide the information, the necessary information, so that we can find the right direction, be oriented towards the right decisions.
You mentioned that we need innovation in mining technology. We haven't really talked about seabed mining in this conversation, but it's important. Huge potential source of these minerals, but also huge potential risk that we could destroy this important carbon sink and ecology that we all depend upon. Something you could start since you raised the question, but I'd be interested in others jumping in on this topic as well.
So look, my comments will be pretty brief in that I think there's more than enough potential to be able to supply the critical minerals that the world needs from existing surface operations before going into seabed mining. A lot of uncertainty still associated with seabed mining, so I think that any mining activity, whether it's above surface or under the ocean, we need to be careful about the impacts that we have, and part of that is understanding, being able to model appropriately, getting appropriate standards in place that people are able to align around, so that we don't have unintended, potentially pretty significant negative consequences. There's a process that needs to be gone through before we engage in mining, be it conventional mining or new types of mining.
Not that we don't have similar challenges in land-based.
But that's what I'm saying, is even land-based, we have to set higher standards and be able to meet those higher standards. Now, part of that will be through ensuring that we bring new technologies to bear on doing it, but also to ensuring that the right companies are backed to do that mining. Those are the companies that do set and uphold high standards and have a track record of doing so.
Anyone else on the seabed?
No, not on the seabed, but maybe to build on the first comment, which was there is actually more than enough potential on the ground, and we don't really need to go into that type of technologies. I think like the recent discovery in Sweden of the lithium reserves that they have. This is an example of the fact that we might have enormous potential in a lot of countries that we don't even know about, because we maybe don't have the right, I mean, you can answer on that question from myself, but because we don't actually invest in the right exploration.
So it's such a good call out. So when we talk about innovation in the mining sector, one of the areas where we need to continue to innovate is on the technologies that allow us to sense and find deposits that have been hard to find with existing technologies. And the combination of that, coupled with things like AI and machine learning, you can bring those two things together to find deposits in places where people didn't think anything existed. So BHP's had a recent experience of that in South Australia, where we went back into old ground, so ground that had been looked at previously, people had said there's nothing there, and we managed to find a big new deposit through new technology and new ways of sifting through old data.
And maybe on the more geopolitical side, as we see that actually our all dependency on oil and gas is becoming a dependency on precious metals, and that it is going to create geopolitical issues. You were talking, Jeremy, on the fact that China is today controlling 50% of the supply chain on the minerals for batteries, and because I mean they've been doing great work on securing, getting the right minerals, the right supply chain for the metals, investing in the right projects in Latin America, in Africa, and elsewhere, to be able to control maybe some mining areas. I don't know if this is also something where you have things to say, and you too as well, Mr. President, on how countries need to own this geopolitical risk. I don't know what.
I'll go. I think one thing for certain is that the resources, you don't pick where the resources are, you've got to find them for a start. They can be in challenging environments. As the President said, you obviously got large-scale communities, many people involved in artisanal mining. You cannot disenfranchise those people to try and to sort of extract those minerals. What you need to try and support the communities, trying to put together standards and controls to assist them in developing those natural resources, and has a great, massive impact actually on the local communities there. So, while we have new technologies, which we need to try and exploit wherever we're operating, we also need to be very cognizant of the fact that we are working with local communities in some regions, and therefore we really have to try and assist them. And and the international market needs to understand how these minerals and metals are effectively procured or developed, and also brought to market in a responsible way. And I think the President is very correct in working with partners to ensure that there's proper governance around this sort of process, so that we can start to develop an industry and can start to enrich the local communities and the country as well.
What is kind of to pull the lens back a little, and you see so much through trading. What is the gap, kind of orders of magnitude, between what we have and what we need?
It's significant. I mean, we have our own interpretation, but if you look at the IEA in terms of what is if we want to reach net zero by 2050, the view is that we need to have 2/3 of energy from renewable sources by 2030, okay? In that scenario, and I'm excluding electrical vehicles, we expect that we need to have probably 20% increase in production per annum to meet those demands by 2030 of copper, for example. And we're also seeing the same issues in zinc and aluminium, because you require these metals to build wind farms, to build the infrastructure for these metals. The problem we have now is that the metal inventories over the past few years have been drawn down. We haven't had expansion in production. And we are now, quite frankly, at fairly critical stages with respect to metal inventories. Our analysis thinks that we've got copper inventories, for example, metal copper inventories, are only 4 days of global consumption. Zinc is even less than 1. So we're actually trying to rebuild an industry, develop an industry, expand an industry to meet the energy transition, yet we're in quite a critical stage in terms of current inventories. So we're in a bit of a predicament.
Gurdeep Singh, I want to ask you about wind and solar for a moment. India, obviously, incredibly rich in renewable resources. Are there roadblocks to your company moving faster and further in wind and solar?
Yeah, I think we just discussed this point that we have a very ambitious plan, and all the actions are in place. And the supply chain issues about the critical minerals, etc. I think these are kind of putting some restrictions on the availability of the equipment itself.
Yeah.
What steps we have taken as a country? We have started incentivizing the production in the country about about the solar value chain, as well as on the wind side, we had been quite comfortable on that part. So I think, except for the critical minerals, I think this is not something which is going to be. But if I can just add one more sentence here, I think it is also giving some kind of opportunity for the recycling and the circular economy in the long run, which is going to be, I think, equally important that we should start right now rather than waiting for some time. And the other thing, this is part of the just transition, so we have to be careful about the environment, societies, people. I think the people who are in the mining area who are living, I think this should be also just looked into. Our Honorable Prime Minister has given the slogan of life, which is life for the environment. I think it is important that how we consume, how we behave, and how sustainable we can really make, while the transition is very important, and it should be as fast as possible, but it should be in a sustainable way. I think that's the only and sustainable, or rather the long-term solution, rather than we keep getting into some kind of setbacks and the disruptions which really causing the kind of difficulties what we have seen in the energy terms in the last more than about 1 year or so. I think these spikes which are really causing, I think, hardships in many parts of the world. So it has to be really sustainable, and it can be sustainable if it is going to be affordable. And if it is going to be affordable, then means we have to see that what is the resources are available, and how technology and the investment both are able to help to hasten, rather to expedite this transition.
Can I just make one very, very quick comment on the point around recycling? We do need to focus on lifting recycling rates, but even with that, so just to be clear, so there's no misunderstanding, even if we see a significant uptick in recycling from already high recycling rates, there's still going to be a massive need for new metals and minerals supplies. So it's important, we have to do it, but it's not going to solve the issue at hand.
I want to ask each of you just to step back a little, and almost everybody in this panel is looking toward the future and renewables, but also heavily invested, as we all are, everybody in this room is, in fossil fuels. How are you, maybe starting at the end here, and realize this is a high altitude question, but just philosophically thinking about this time of transition and how we do reduce one and grow the other. We're obviously behind where we need to be. How are you thinking about that at your company? Gurdeep Singh.
Yeah, I think, again, very, very important point, whether it is going to be only wind or solar, which can really go for the only clean sources of energy. I think parallelly we will have to start working on the other technologies, like how to reduce the carbon emission and the carbon capture and utilization, not only the sequestration, but I think this is going to be part of the circular economy, and this is one thing which has not really caught the attraction of many technology providers as well as the financing. We are conducting some of the pilot projects, but I believe that worldwide it is important that the thrust has come on the solar and wind. Similarly, there should be thrust on the carbon capture and utilization, so that we can really create low carbon energy and then reach to the net zero. I still believe that 2/3 of the population will have to depend next few decades on some carbon-based energy. But the challenge is that how to reduce that emission, and on a long period, how we can really bring the technologies where we can go for this circular economy, and that also through the carbon capture and utilization. I think this is one of the area which is going to be quite evident, like what we're discussing about the solar and wind.
Thank you. Jeremy?
While we're involved in the supply chain management of oil and gas, as well as minerals and metals and other commodities, there obviously is a major sea change going on with the energy transition. We've established a renewables energy division, which we're invested in solar, wind and battery energy storage systems, and we'll have 4 gigawatts of, if you like, alternative energy or renewable energy in place by 2025. We've also very committed to ammonia and hydrogen. We think we're very supportive of the hydrogen business. We've got two projects in Europe, one quite significant one where an investment decision will be made in the second half of the year. We believe ammonia will be one of the principal new marine fuels or non-hydrocarbon marine fuels of the future, and we're also co-sponsoring with MAN Engines the development of a 2-stroke marine engine. So that's sort of what we're doing in terms of activity. I would also say, for our own emissions and carbon footprint, we've committed to certain reductions. We've reduced by 30% already. We have also have a joint venture with Palantir, which is tracing Scope 3 emissions. And that's very important, which we've, together our own carbon trading division, where we're investing in nature-based solutions, where we're just trying to find, if you like, discover what the Scope 3 emissions are for the minerals and hydrocarbons, etc., that we transport, and trying to find solutions for our customer base, whereby they then can understand what those emissions are, if we can reduce them through different alternative routes or different processes, and then secondly, using, if you like, natural-based solutions which are accredited for reducing the emissions.
Mr. President, how do you think about this issue?
Bien.
Well, I would like to look at this under a realistic angle. As you probably know, the African continent is the continent with the lowest level of carbon emissions, 3 to 4% max. And as of COP21, the countries polluting the most, had committed that they would pay compensations to African countries which are supporting the consequences, except that everybody was hypercritical, because when we started saying we wanted to mine our own fuel or fossil energies, we have been blamed. And we need those energies. We need them to develop our countries. And if everybody kept to their word, especially the countries that release most carbon, if they gave us the compensation they promised, that money would help us improve our technology faster. I'm talking about my country. We have 700 sites on which we can develop hydroelectrical power plants. And we have the INGA project, a huge project, and the INGA project alone can produce 60 gigawatts. So, just so you understand that we have the potential, but we don't have the money. We don't have the capitals. And if the countries kept their words, the commitments they have taken during the COP meetings, we would be able to move faster towards the energy transition. And progressively, we could forget about hydrocarbons. Except that I agree with Mr. Singh. This cannot be done overnight. We can't just stop. Everything grinds to a halt now. No, that's not possible. It will take a few more years. And we have to start thinking about how we can release less carbon. But unfortunately, it will take a few more years.
We see things going forward is, so first on the renewable side, we see that renewables will drastically grow. We see that in the Middle East, in Asia, typically we see them grow 10 to 30 times by 2050. We also believe that nuclear power will have to continue to exist. Today, if nothing is done, the nuclear power capacity. Today, the nuclear capacity is it's the second biggest volume of energy, of low carbon energy after hydro. And if no investment is done, it will reduce to 1/3 of what it is today. And we believe that there will have to be investment in nuclear power as well. It will provide base load for many countries. It will also be a source for yellow hydrogen. So we believe that there's also a need to invest in nuclear. We strongly believe in hydrogen. Jeremy was talking about that. At Siemens Energy, we're investing heavily in this. We are building a very big gigafactory together with Air Liquide that is actually going to start its operations this year. And we really believe that there's a strong future for e-fuels everywhere in the world. Yeah. But apart from this low carbon energy, I think the thing that today we're not working enough on is all the energy efficiency. If you actually want to reduce your carbon emissions with the growing energy demand, the growing population, you only work on how to greenify your mix, you're actually completely missing the point.
Mike, forgive me. I want to, you spoke to this in the earlier conversation. We just have a few minutes left, just open up, maybe we get one or two questions from the audience. If you'd stand, please, in the back.
Thank you very much. My question is for President of DRC. Mr. President, if security is indeed a big problem for you, and clearly if you were able to solve it as DRC government or DRC army, you would have done it by now. My question to you is, why don't you then collaborate with the Luanda process or the Nairobi process to find a lasting solution? I believe the solution is in your hands to own the problem, but to work with those who can help you solve it, because we all believe, I'm from Rwanda, we all believe that security is paramount for investments and tourism, and we must all play our part. Thank you.
Si vous êtes Rwandais.
Well, if you are from Rwanda, you're probably aware that in November, there was a discussion, a meeting took place, and the discussion led to a roadmap to try and bring us out of the crisis. The meeting took place in Angola, in Luanda, and all the countries were present, especially, obviously, there were representatives from Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, but other countries were present as well. And as I said, we agreed on a roadmap which decreed a truce and a ceasefire and immediate withdrawal of the M23 group, which is supported by Rwanda, on November the 25th. They were supposed to start moving out on November 25th, and as of January 15th, we were supposed to acknowledge that the process had come to an end. Well, lady, I'm sorry, but M23, this terrorist group supported by Rwanda, is still there. They are still present in some communities, in some villages that they took from the Democratic Republic of Congo. In spite of the international pressure, the group is still there. They pretend to move, they act like they are moving, but they're not. They're simply moving around, redeploying elsewhere, and they stay in the towns that they have captured. And in the meantime, there has been a slaughter in a place called Shishite. 100 people, innocent people, were slaughtered. The group slaughtered them because they wanted to frighten the community, they wanted to frighten the population and move the population away. Because in this place, they know that there are precious metals in the soil, in the ground of that particular village. So that is a huge challenge. It's very difficult. We cannot invest to develop the country and invest to increase invest the necessary resources to increase our armed forces' strength so that they can defend us. If we all shared the same philosophy, which was my philosophy when I became the president of the country, at the time I wanted to talk to all our neighbors. We have 9 neighboring countries, and I wanted to offer development projects. We thought we could all benefit from these projects. We thought they would benefit to all our populations, and I can name all of the 9 countries, and I can tell you which project I supported and offered, and I encouraged those countries to invest in these joint projects so that we could develop our economic exchanges and trade, so that we could guarantee peace and stability and safety in the area. Unfortunately, some of those neighboring countries who wanted to keep fighting, it has been impossible to complete those projects. So, madam, I'm really sorry. But the safety issue we have in the Great Lake region has a name, Rwanda.
On the topic of making this energy transition just between developed and developing countries, to maybe bounce on different ideas that were said there. Many of the countries that actually have precious metals and these resources are developing countries. Yeah. And there are some initiatives today of some of these countries which I find very smart, which is localization initiatives, so that they don't only exploit mines, but actually transfer a lot of the manufacturing industry in their country, so that the batteries, etc., are done in the country, and so that a real industry can actually happen and develop. This is maybe a solution to part of that.
For next year's, we'll get back together. Thank you for the question. I think we're over time, actually. Thank you to this great panel and good discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you.